Liberation was founded in the 1950s as the movement for colonial freedom at the time when Britain was fighting colonial wars in Africa, Malaya, and other places as well. And I've been reading a great deal recently of the history of the Labour movement during the post-war period, which undoubtedly made amazing achievements on the domestic agenda in Britain, but its international achievements much more patchy, and the oppression of the colonial liberation struggle in many of the colonies was something that was quite disgraceful. And I think the formation of the movement for colonial freedom by Fenner Brockway, Tony Benn and others was about building that voice within the Labour movement. Liberation is obviously a successor to the movement for colonial freedom. And the other big issue is, of course, human rights and denial of human rights around the world to many people. And human rights are collective as well as individual, as the 1948 Universal Declaration points out. They do include the right to housing, the right to health, the right to education, and the right to eat. And one of my last acts as leader was to propose an amendment to a government statement in the House of Commons, which said that henceforth the right to eat in Britain should be a fundamental right guaranteed by the government, not through food banks, but through decent pay and conditions that people can afford to eat. Antonio Guterres made a very important call as the corona crisis began to develop in January, and that was there should be a global ceasefire in all conflicts in order to deal with COVID. You can have a ceasefire dealing with COVID, of course, you can have a ceasefire on other occasions as well. The conflicts around the world are fueled by the arms trade, are fueled by injustice, by poverty, by inequality, by abuse of human rights, and we have to be the voice for peace. We have to be the voice to bring about a ceasefire in Yemen. We have to be the voice that brings about peace. The Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty Review Conference, which should have been held in New York in April and May, and I indeed was due to be there for it, was obviously cancelled and will now be held next year. We should see that as an opportunity, not a problem, an opportunity to build those alliances, and in Britain through the Strategic Defence and Security Review, build those alliances about what a different economic and security policy can look like. What is real security? Real security surely is somewhere to live, is enough to eat, is education, is health. It is all those fundamentals, the right to breathe clean air, the right to live in a sustainable environment. That's what real security is about. Real security doesn't come from an ever-expanding arms race in which we're all made more dangerous and more at risk as a result of it. And so the role of liberation, I think, has to be to bring people together to campaign on the economic issues, the environment issues, the human rights issues, and of course, the great issues of peace and justice around the world. There's got to be a lot of changes. You can no longer consign a whole proportion of the population to poverty, to inequality, to shorter life expectancy because they're black. You have to recognize the colonial legacy, the legacy of slavery, and the legacy of all of those horrors of history as a way of our understanding how we create that pathway to the future. Liberation was founded to oppose colonialism and support decolonization and support the liberation of peoples. Political independence is one thing. Economic sustainability and independence is something that should follow from that, but in many cases hasn't. Liberation stands for the liberation of people, their minds and their hearts as well, so that they can live the lives they want to lead. And that's what liberation is about. And I hope if you're joining our call for the first time, you'll come again and you'll become part of our wonderful organization.